Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and this is a video response to Chalice in Chains, Sam's video asking whether skills in D&D are a detriment to roleplay. Now, in Sam's video, he gives some examples of players using skill rolls without any form of description or actual role-playing going on, which, let's face it, the hobby's called role-playing, so the clues are there. He also mentions OSR games and how they tend to rely more on description. For instance, he gives the classic example: if you're looking for a trap, you might have a 10-foot pole and you're like poking around looking for the trap, rather than just walking into an area and saying, can I roll to detect traps? So it's a use of player ingenuity instead of just the skill rolls, which that's a very, very valid point. But I think in any roleplay game, there is a certain amount of disconnect between player skill and character skill. That's just unavoidable. Hell, in D&D, I might be playing a master thief who is like an absolute genius when it comes to detecting traps. Or maybe I'm playing a ranger who's like amazing at tracking in the wilderness. Now, I've done a little bit of basic tracking. I could maybe spot a really obvious trap in real life, but in real life, I am neither a master thief nor a master of wilderness survival. Now, Sam's brought up the fact that often people will say, well, you're not expected to simulate combat in a game, you just roll the dice for it, so why should you be expected to do the same with social skills? And Sam makes a very good point that role-playing is inherently a social game, and I think that certainly is the case. I like to encourage people when they're trying to make a skill roll, if I'm running a skill-based system, to actually role-play out, or at least vaguely try and describe what they're doing. So if someone says they're looking for traps, even if I'm going to have them make a detect traps roll, I'll ask them what they are doing. And that's because it adds to the narrative, but I do feel at the end of the day, it's quite possible for you to be playing a character who's cleverer, more dexterous, has particular skills that you as a player do not actually have. Now, as long as a player gives some attempt at describing stuff, I'm normally willing to cut them a break. Now, part of the other problem with this is, as Sam says in his video, that occasionally you'll get a player who like really goes to town on the description. They really describe how their characters are looking for said trap or whatever the case may be, but then they roll a 1 or something and they failed. Now, yes, that is unfortunate. Failure is an inherent part of RPGs, as is success. However, one of the things I'm a big fan of is failing forward. So when someone fails a roll, rather than just going, oh, you failed, bad times for you, I try and say they've succeeded in some way, but in a way that causes complications for them. And certainly if I was running like a D&D style game, if someone just said, I'm searching for traps, and that was all they did, and I tried to draw a bit of description out of them, and they were just like, no, I'm just searching for traps, and then they failed, I'd just be like, yeah, bad times, you've not found any traps. However, if someone gave me a description of what they were doing, and then they rolled and they failed, I might say they've spotted some signs of traps, but in doing so, maybe it's taken them a little bit longer to do so, or maybe there's a secondary trap that they've not spotted, or perhaps while they're looking for it, the noise they're making has drawn someone wanted attention. So it's not me just saying, oh, you're not skilled enough, you've failed. It's me saying, you've started to locate the traps, but because you failed your roll, some other complication has occurred. And personally, I feel that's a better way of dealing with that situation, because it can be quite disheartening if you're like a master trapsmith, you're really going to town on the description, you're putting your heart into it, and you just happen to get that unlucky roll. Whereas I was playing in a game and I said to the GM, I'm looking for traps, and I described it all. I'm poking around my 10-foot pole, I'm looking for holes in the wall or whatever, and I roll a 1, and the GM just said, oh, bad times, you've set off the trap, or you're obviously not good enough to spot these traps. I'll be like, oh, well, I've got this wicked high spot trap skill. What I do is I just like picking my nose or like not looking in the right place or whatever, and that'd be quite disheartening. Whereas if the GM said to me like, oh, you're looking around and you find this trap, unfortunately you set off a secondary trap, or while you're looking, the noise you're making attracts some guards and they come in, making the scene a whole lot more complicated. I wouldn't feel so bad about that because I've still found the trap, but there's still a consequence for me failing that roll. Now, Sam also mentions that occasionally he feels people can use skill rolls as shortcuts, which can be a bad thing if you're just trying to shortcut all the roleplay altogether. However, sometimes shortcuts can be valuable. Let's say you've got a person who's playing a rogue, since we seem to be using rogues for all our examples, that insists on checking like every area extensively for traps, and it's holding up the game. The rest of the players aren't really getting involved in it. It can be good sometimes just to say, well, make a roll and shortcut through that and get on with another scene and keep the game rolling forward. But it very much depends on the situation of the game. So a little bit of GM discretion is needed and a bit of adjudication. But that's why we have GMs in the first place. So in conclusion, I don't think skill systems are necessarily a detriment to role-playing. I think they can be if people try and use them as a substitute for role-playing. However, in that case, yes, they can be a detriment. But in my opinion, it is just my opinion, that's not really the way skill systems are meant to be used. They're meant to be used in conjunction with the role-playing to allow you to play a character who has skills, abilities, knowledges that you as a player do not necessarily have. Now, I believe that the GM should encourage you to attempt to role-play and describe your actions to the best of your abilities, and then if you do so, they should maybe give you a bit of a bonus or in some other way reward you for that amount of description, and that can include things like failing forward, as I've mentioned. But I think you need to use roleplay and narration in conjunction with the skill system of whatever game you're using, and that's the way to get the richest experience out of it, in my opinion. So I don't think they're necessarily a detriment to roleplay, but they're also not a substitute for roleplay. So I hope that's a reasonable answer to your question, Sam. I'll put a link to Sam's original video in the description down below. I hope you've enjoyed this video. You'll consider clicking on like and subscribe. Until I see you next time, take care and happy gaming. I hope if you've enjoyed this video, you'll consider checking out some of the other videos available on Red Dice Diaries. Take care.